Everyone, it's Daniel Elwood and Robert Johnson, the Last Nighters, and the Last Nighters are part of the Launchpad Media, where they're always launching new ideas in your direction. Check it out, thelaunchpadmedia.com. We are doing Straight Outta Compton tonight on the 89th episode of the show. You can find the show notes more at lastnighter.com/89. This is going to be a fun episode. We have a returning guest. He is the Afrolibertarian, and we will introduce him in just a moment. If you like what we do here, do check us out on Patreon at lastnighter.com/Patreon. Throw a couple of shekels our way. You can get some pre-show, post-show bonus content. We also, at the upper levels, have live stream access where you can actually see us making this sausage live. And you can even interact with us a little bit in the comments. And we might even, give you a shout out or two here or there. Like the Anarchist Mom is one of our Patreon supporters. So there you go, Anarchist Mom. Another shout out for you. So another thing you can do is subscribe on the old iTunes and give us a rating or review. And then we post those reviews on our page, and it gets other people interested in what we're doing. And so the more earballs we can get, the more we can get our little, what would you call this, Robert? Like we wrap the pill of libertarianism and Austrian economics in a little bit of a sugar-coated, kind of easy to swallow form, right?
We make it non-confrontational. We're talking about a movie which everybody can relate to on some level, and then we sneak in our libertarian propaganda here and there. So yeah, I think sometimes we're more overt about it than other times, but I think even if you're completely new to these ideas, you can get something out of the show, and you might be a little bit have your interest piqued by something we might say.
I hope that we are somewhat effective. I know that we have at least turned one person away from the altar of statism. So
that's a win, baby.
That's a win. That's a win in our book. And speaking of winners, we have Ryan Jones, the Afro-Libertarian, joining us. You have been a guest with us in the past on previous iterations of our show. We talked about Selma, Watchmen, and Logan with you. And I really appreciate you joining us for this one tonight. Go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience and throw any links or Twitter handles out there, and then we'll get into the movie.
No, man, it's good to be back. Really enjoyed being on with you guys the last few times. So it's been a while, been a 2 years maybe. I don't have any, I don't have a official website, a blog, or anything like that. Just catch me on Twitter at the Afrolibertarian, on Twitter at the Afrolibertarian. So I'm always tweeting. I don't tweet as much these days, but I try to get a few shots in here and there. So sorry if you heard this noise. That was my phone vibrating. But yeah, just catch me there. Catch me on Twitter, or if you join the Tom Woods Elite group, I'm in there posting all the time and chatting it up with you guys. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of the tamer groups that you and I are in together.
Oh yeah.
Oh, we have lots of fun. All right, so let's get into how we start this off with the Google description. So Straight Outta Compton came out 2015, though it seemed far more recent to me. It's labeled as a drama/crime film, 2 hour and 47 minutes, 7.9 on that IMDb, 88% Rotten Tomatoes, 72% Metacritic. However, 95% of Google users gave it the thumbs up. The description is, in 1988, a groundbreaking new group revolutionizes music and pop culture, changing and influencing hip-hop forever. NWA's first studio album, Straight Outta Compton, stirs controversy with its brutally honest depiction of life in southern Los Angeles. With guidance from veteran manager Jerry Heller, band members Ice Cube, Dr. Dre, Eazy-E, DJ Yella, and MC Ren navigate their way through the industry, acquiring fame, fortune, and a place in history. Came out August 14, 2015. Director is F. Gary Gray. He is also the guy who did Friday, among other things. The featured song is Straight Outta Compton. Box office at $201.6 million. And that's pretty much the information there. Robert, your reaction?
Well, I'm always amused. Sometimes, well, not always. Sometimes I'm amused by the categorization that people put these movies in. What did you say it was? You said something /crime?
Drama/crime.
Drama. Yeah, okay. I'd say drama / like biopic. Crime. There are a few crimes committed in this film, but I wouldn't say this movie focuses on crime. And this is just the story of this music group. I mean, Eazy-E starts off.
Wait. I thought it was a story of a crazy motherfucker named Ice Cube.
No, it's all of them. It's not just Cube. Eazy, Dre, Ren, like you just said. You already said their names. But, I mean,
don't forget Yella.
That's right. He doesn't get a lot of love, but he's there. E starts off as a drug dealer. But what crimes are committed? Other than maybe Jerry's kind of like embezzling, I guess you could call it, or maybe mismanagement. I don't know. Daniel.
Oh man, I mean, there's a load of crime in this movie.
Well, okay, what, the false arrest by the cops in Detroit? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, there's that. I mean, most of the crime is with a badge. I'll give you that. But then on the surface level, though, and I kind of want to get into this maybe a little bit later, but they are there's this how do you say this properly? There's a certain stigma attached to South Central LA and the types of people that NWA are. Many are engaged in illicit activities that are technically illegal, though wouldn't be in a fully free libertarian society. But they are quote unquote crimes in today's world, or in 1989, 88, whenever this action took place. And so they are committing illegal acts, and people who are similar to them are committing many illegal acts. And so there's a lot of crime in that respect, right? So it's like, not criminal, not real crime, but surface level crime.
Yeah, well, okay, so there's the opening where the Crenshaw Mafia guy threatens the kid in the bus. And then there's the LAPD just randomly harassing people and assaulting them. But I wouldn't call it like a crime movie.
All right. Yeah,
you know
if we're nitpicking genres, yeah. It's not like a Casino or a Godfather, mafia type movie.
Yeah. When I think of like a crime movie, I think of kind of a cop show where you see the criminals and you have the cops trying to get them. That's not this,
Yeah, no, this is just the story of NWA in the late 80s and the 90s and their life and times. I don't know. I thought it was really good. I enjoyed it. I am glad that it's, Dre and Cube, had a big part in the making of the movie. I mean, I'm sure they had all kinds of input. So I'm guessing that the story is fairly accurate, and it was a fascinating, if a bit long movie.
Yeah, I gotta say, I found the movie to be a little bit incoherent in some ways. Like, I wasn't sure really what the story was. I get it that it's a biopic, or what Doc Brown would call a biopic, which I thought was weird. He was our guest for Back to the Future last week. So it's more like just chronicling the events on a timeline. This happened, and then this happened, and this happened. And there's some impact, and it relates to the thing that happened before. But I really felt like this could have branched out into sort of here's a movie that's like the origins, and then they get into some of the other stuff, like, I don't know, maybe like a TV series or something. That would have been pretty interesting. Like,
yeah, you do kind of wish it would have been like an HBO or maybe a Netflix series, because it's such a like a small percentage of their whole story, as far as Dr. Dre, Ice Cube. They pretty much saw the end of Eazy-E there, but it led to such a bigger story. But I mean, overall, you kind of look at it and you feel like, it captured that little glimpse, that little snapshot in time, which was kind of a very, I guess, an important time for that genre, for hip hop, for, that urban kind of music, for, for the world starting to get a view of the West Coast and that gang culture, which wasn't really prevalent in the United States, around the United States. It started getting prevalent, towards the late 80s and the 90s. And it kind of industrialized and glamorized and commercialized that whole, blood, Crip, West Coast gangster culture, which really didn't exist across the United States. That was purely a West Coast, Los Angeles thing, and it kind of exported that whole image out to not just the United States, but the world, really.
Yeah, I wasn't on Gin and Juice, the music video, wasn't Snoop wearing like a blue bandana, I want to say? He kind of had that.
Yeah, he was from the Crip. The area he was from was a Crip dominated area, but he wasn't like a gangster. He wasn't a Crip, like a member, but when you lived out there, you pretty much, you were a part of it or you weren't, so if you grew up somewhere, you either had to rep it or you didn't. You know what I'm saying?
For sure.
Yeah. Back to the point I was trying to suss out. Like, I was hoping that the movie would focus more on like one main conflict or two, kind of like story arcs. Because like when the government kind of comes after them, I was hoping like, oh, great, this is going to be awesome. Like, let's see how they give an FU to the government and continue, fight the free speech thing. But it's like a 10-minute snippet of a 2.5-hour movie.
Well, yeah, I could see that. We're you were wanting more of a focused story. So like we watched what was it, Molly's Game the other week, and you had like a similar problem with it. Like you were like, why am I watching this? What was the point of this? There's not some main theme that's driven home or some kind of like satisfying conclusion, right? It's just like, and life goes on, and Dre starts Aftermath, and he goes on to make more great music, and right.
Yeah, and I mean, I appreciate like the insight into their lives as much as they're able to capture that and present it. I mean, I'm a suburban, white guy who grew up listening to this music on my paper route and actually got in trouble for it. So I mean, I was a fan, right? And so it's fun to like learn more about like where they came from and how they interacted and how they blew up and became famous and how their manager was like screwing them. You see all these little snippets and whatnot, but it's almost like a documentary style biography thing where you're like, if you're interested in these people, then watch this and learn more about them. But
yeah, I would agree with you that it is a movie that tries to do a lot. It's a 3-hour movie, but it's still compressing a decade into 3 hours, which is of course impossible. You're picking and choosing things. But for me, the central conflict of the movie was Eazy-E. It's kind of like the Eazy-E story. And like this whole movie was kind of like their homage to their friend Eazy. And it was his kind of their relationship with him, and how it broke down with the issues with Jerry and the disagreements over the contracts and the money. And then them coming back together at the end, but then the tragedy of him dying right as they're about to maybe do another NWA project. It's kind of like I thought that was a pretty satisfying ending for me.
Yeah, and it was also, I mean, these biopics kind of take the kind of same approach where, you see the humble beginnings, you see the rise, you see the influence of external pressure, you see the how money and fame and those things kind of get between natural friendships that develop. Then you see the eventual downfall. So I mean, if you look, pretty much every movie like that kind of follows that format, and that's all this was. I mean, yeah, it was like you said. I think Eazy-E was that common theme in the whole movie. That was the character where it kind of built around, which I thought was interesting, since he was the one that's no longer here. So yeah, I think that was the common theme. But you're right. There isn't one message to take away from the movie or anything like that. That wasn't. I don't think that was even the purpose of the movie. It was just, hey, this is what happened. For better or for worse. Here it is. And let's move on.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder what other people would think about it. I mean, here we're listening to three guys that kind of grew up listening to this music, were fans of this music. So a lot of this movie was really nostalgic for me. Like,
right.
When Snoop comes in, I'm like, yeah, I mean, Eminem even gets a brief, thing in the post credits, or in the credits. But I wonder if you had if you just landed here from Mars, if you thought this would be a good movie, because the whole time I'm just learning about these guys that I was fans of back in the day, and just really interested in their life, because even to see them react to the Rodney King thing, because I remember watching the Rodney King thing and reacting in the way I did, but to see that it affected them a lot, and how that whole thing was really, I don't know if you want to call it cathartic or like emotionally connecting for me and them, but that really was a human thing that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, you bring a lot of foreknowledge to it, being fans, and so you kind of already know some of the basics. So I think someone who has no idea who these guys are watches this, I don't think they think it's a great movie. I think this is like kind of for fans or for people who are somewhat familiar with them, which is fine. I mean, I love movies that are for fans. That's great. Like
I don't know.
Blade Runner 2049. That's like a for fans movie.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, for example, my wife, she's younger than me, so she didn't really listen to a lot of this music. I mean, she's a fan of hip hop, and she knows Ice Cube and Snoop and all those guys, but she never was a real fan. And the movie kind of made her a fan. She made her want to go back and listen, and made her want to investigate a little more into what they were talking about. So it kind of sold her on some of that stuff, even without her being a fan of it or knowing much about it, because she grew up more in the late 90s, 2000s. So I don't know. I mean, maybe if you're completely separated from like, the hip hop and, pop culture here in the United States and you watched it, yeah, I don't know if you would like it. I really don't know. It's one of those, unseen things. I don't know how you would feel about it but I know I've seen like biopics of like the Motown era, like the Temptations or stuff like that, eras that I didn't grow up in, but I'd see it and, it made me way more interested in that whole era. So I wonder if, some people would kind of take that view. And I don't think when they created the movie, they intended it to reach out to people that didn't know anything about it. I think they were kind of intended to, dip into that nostalgia that people carried. And, and we saw that with a lot of the lines and the music they played and stuff like that. They wanted to kind of, pull on those nostalgic strings to get people, into the movies, and it worked. I mean, it made a ton of money.
Yeah, one more thing from me about why I'm glad this, as a fan, why I'm glad this movie exists. I remember liking the music, and I had The Chronic, I had Doggy Style. I didn't have Straight Outta Compton, but I knew a lot of the songs, like Fuck the Police, that sort of thing. But I didn't listen to, or I didn't read into their lives. I don't know how well, their lives were documented. I mean, I'm sure they were in Rolling Stone maybe, and I remember having a subscription to that for a year or two, but I don't remember reading a whole lot of stories about it. They were probably on other, hip hop magazines and that sorts of things, but I didn't know the stories behind why they broke up. I didn't know why there wasn't another NWA album. I didn't, and I didn't know why, Dre and, I didn't know those stories. So as a fan, I'm just like, oh, okay, then now this is coming out and I'm going to listen to this, and this is great music, great. But I didn't, this is really illuminating as to why my history, my past is what it is.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Is it fun to learn?
And now you know why Cube made, Fuck the Police and No Vaseline, two great songs.
Yeah, why Cube left. I didn't know why Cube went to where did he go to? In New York? I forget. What was the
Priority Records.
No, but it was the other one.
He went to Priority, but
Lynch Mob.
Lynch Mob. Yeah, when he released like 2 albums for Lynch Mob, and I was like, why is Cube on Lynch Mob now? He's doing this solo stuff. I mean,
that was his crew. Yeah.
Yeah, like Today Is a Good Day. I mean, one of the greatest all-time tracks, but anyway.
Yeah, even though the Lakers beat the Supersonics.
Well,
that one hurt a little.
Don't let us break up your crew.
It was accurate, though. I mean, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, exactly. And Ryan, thanks for bringing in Bastiat, the unseen, and then also the subjective value. Like people are going to see things and value it in their own individual way. I do have an appreciation for the story, and let's talk about why Cube left, because it seemed shady to me how Jerry was handling the situation with the rest of the band members. I mean, Eazy-E, he took his seed money, and so I guess he was sort of the focal point from that perspective for Jerry, right? Because it was Ruthless Records that was Eazy-E's money, and so Eazy-E was sort of like the main focal point owner of the group or the music or however, and so Jerry was focused on him, but he just left everyone else spinning in the wind, and it was frustrating to watch that, because you're like, Cube's the lyricist and he is a vocalist for much of it. Like, why are you not handling him? Why are you not taking care of him?
And the writer.
Dre's worth his weight in gold, baby. I mean,
Dre was the music. Dre was the music, and Ice Cube was the writer. Ice Cube wrote most of the raps for Dr. Dre, for Eazy. He wrote that first hit Eazy song, that Cruising Down the Street, in my 6'4". That was Ice Cube. So
yeah, Boys in the Hood.
Yeah, Boys in the Hood. Oh, he wrote all that. He wrote all the hits.
Yeah, why you wouldn't want to lock those guys up and make them happy is beyond me. There must have been something going on that the movie doesn't delve into. I'm not exactly sure. It just kind of paints Jerry and E kind of as these villain kind of characters a little bit, at least Jerry. And like E is kind of like this kind of going along with Jerry, whatever Jerry says sort of thing. But Eric, as in Eric Eazy-E, was quite the savvy businessman. Like when he originally goes in to talk to Jerry for the very first time, he's like, nah, I'm cool. I'm doing it by myself. I don't need you. Whereas a lot of people were like, oh man, just trying to talk to anybody in the music business, to try and get any kind of a momentum. But they were happy and believing in themselves and their own talent and their own abilities. When they're young, these are young guys. they're teenagers, very young in their 20s, early in their 20s. They got to be fairly impressionable, got to be a little bit intimidated. But no, these guys were like, no, man, we're going to do this. So I don't know how much of a dupe Eric was. Kind of in the movie, it's painted that Eric was the kind of good guy, kind of like trusting Jerry, and Jerry was like the maniacal villain guy. Not sure how much of both of those, each of those is true. I tend to think that probably Eric kind of had some willful ignorance about some things, because like, wouldn't you want to like be like, no, Jerry, let's settle this up with Dre and everybody else. I mean, what are we doing here? Let's get Cube, get a contract. Let's go. Let's do this. I mean, why wouldn't you want to pay these guys? I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Jerry actually sued the production of this movie, whoever was responsible for making this movie. And he ended up dying, I think in 2016. So shortly after the movie came out. And I don't know if the estate is still pursuing the court action or whatever, but apparently he did not appreciate how he was depicted. And part of his argument in the court was that it materially affected other clients' opinion of him, affecting his ability to get new work.
From this movie? Or
that this movie would affect his ability to get new clients. And it's kind of a moot point now because
like a defamation kind of a thing.
Yeah, defamation. It was that's all. I think the court dismissed it even after he died, because I remember Ice Cube being like, "Hell yeah,"
Yeah, and another guy who was upset about how he was depicted in the movie was Suge Knight. Which, let's talk about that guy. That guy, oh my God, I had no idea. I just knew of him peripherally, in the last 20 years, like being associated. He was in the car with Tupac when he got shot, right? And he was associated with NWA, and he was associated with Dre and some other things. You keep hearing about Suge Knight.
He's the devil.
Yeah, he's crazy in this movie. I mean, holy crap. And apparently he was involved in altercations on the set and killed a guy. And now he's in prison for that.
Yeah, he rolled over a guy's skull.
Wow.
With his Jeep. Like, there's video of it.
Yeah,
I mean, holy shit, man.
I remember reading Rolling Stone articles back in the mid to late 90s. Like when I had my subscription, like Tupac was here and Puff Daddy, these kind of guys were like big. And Suge Knight would often get some kind of write-up about him, or he'd be mentioned in a story. And I remember one was told by Vanilla Ice that he had to give up like half of Ice Ice Baby or 90%. I forget what the percentage is of Ice Ice Baby, but he got threatened by Suge Knight. So when I saw him in the movie, I was like, well, yeah, the guy's an animal. So I don't know. I don't know what the truth is, but apparently he rubs a lot of people the wrong way, and they make him out to be quite a villain.
Yeah, it seems to be his MO, to beat people into signing contracts. I guess it was a little bit fuzzy in the movie here that they got Eazy-E to release Dre from his contract because of the beating. Like, that's what I read. But then in the movie, it's sort of like, I think fumbles that up a little bit.
It does, because what actually happened is, if you look at the history, I don't know what kind of deal they signed, but like Dr. Dre still had to pay Eazy-E, even after the Chronic and all that stuff, he had to pay Eazy-E.
Yeah. That's why Eazy said Dre Day made Eazy's payday.
Exactly. I mean, it was, so it wasn't like, oh, they just beat him and that was it. No, it was like there were lawyers involved, and there was like, contract dealings, so it wasn't as simple as the movie made it. Like it should, like, obviously, when you're dealing with contracts and the law, you can't get around that stuff, man. You have to deal with it. And that's why, Suge Knight, there was a scene where he said, let me have my people look at it, because he was real connected to some pretty smart people at Interscope, like Jimmy Iovine and those guys, and they knew how to work those contracts and get people paid, and just kind of take care of people, just so there won't be hassles down the line. So if that meant paying Eazy-E, a percentage for the next couple of years, and hey, that's so be it.
It's interesting, these contracts that musicians sign with record labels. There seems to be, all through, I don't know, past couple decades of my life at least, there's always some artist, and I remember like John Fogerty is just one that jumps out of my mind, where they want out of some kind of contract that they signed early on, and the record company won't release them. They're just like, no, because what are these contracts that these people are signing? I mean, in my mind, contracts almost always have, or any valid contract is going to have some kind of an escape clause. Like, okay, you can leave, but in this case, it's like, at least with these contracts, it's like, no, we're not letting you go. You can't go anywhere. Anything you make, we own. What's the verbiage in these contracts?
I don't know the verbiage, but usually these record companies put up some kind of advance. So, maybe they might put up, 250,000, $500,000 in advances to record the albums. Back then it was like expensive to record an album. You had to rent studio time, musicians, production assistants, shoot a video. Videos were costing like almost $1 million. So you had, these record companies would front that money and you got to pay it back. So, if you shoot, if you make a couple hit albums and once they subtract all the touring costs and the production costs and their profit and all that stuff, you still owe. So it's like, no, you're not leaving, or you could be bought out. Like usually there is an out, but it costs money and that price is usually arbitrary. It's not one set price. They could, you could buy me out for $1 million, you could buy them out for $5 million. And that's pretty much what they did with Eazy-E. They with Dr. Dre, he bought Suge Knight and Interscope bought Dr. Dre out of Eazy-E and Jeffrey Heller's contract, but it cost quite a bit. They had to give up percentages of royalties they received going forward.
Yeah, it's crazy because like they were so successful, it seemed like there was plenty of money to go around. So like back to why are they screwing Dre and Cube and even Yella and Ren, It's like there's plenty of money, guys. Like what the heck?
Yeah, who knows? But it's like there's no visibility, there's no transparency. So, you're staying in hotels, you're traveling city to city, you're hiring all these people to work the tour. It's so you don't know what's being spent. Those guys surely don't know. Ice Cube doesn't know. Dr. Dre doesn't know what's being spent. Only Heller, he's the only one that knows. So when at the end of the day, when he's like, hey, you get a $75,000 check, maybe he's right. Like maybe that's just what they're due, but they're not making the decisions on what to spend prior to that, and he's not even coming to them and saying, hey, you can stay at this hotel, or you can stay at this hotel or this hotel, and we'll save this much. Here's the balance sheet. Here's what we're looking to spend, and giving them the options to, allocate their money intelligently. He's just taking full control of it. So I think that's what it comes down to. You see it with all these artists. Every single artist, whatever genre, they always end up having a problem with their contracts because it's pretty much they have no control, no visibility, and they just don't know. And I can understand that being uncomfortable. So it's not always necessarily where they're being screwed, but they just don't know what they've signed into. It's just ignorance.
Right. And I don't know how many times I've heard like the managers screwing them out of the money, though. You always hear those stories about them being embezzled out of like millions of dollars.
Well, if you look at it from an artist perspective, they're like, okay, I'm on this one stage. I'm the one on stage. I'm the one writing. I'm the one singing. I'm the one the fans love. I'm the one all the media wants to talk to. Why are you getting this huge percentage of my money? That's how they are looking at it. Meanwhile, the manager's looking at it like, I'm the reason you're getting all that publicity and marketing and all that stuff. So, it's one of those things where you kind of, I guess it comes down to trust,
Right. And it's like in a way, it's a symbiotic relationship, though the cards are sort of stacked in a way to where you don't know what the other players have. Right. Exactly. So it becomes a bit adversarial, even though it is actually complementary.
Yeah, exactly. I can see how manager and a record company would provide value to an artist, at least in the beginning. And that's probably why they want those long-term benefits. But once an act is established, man, I would, GTFO of any kind of contract and then do it yourself.
Yeah, I imagine there's a bunch of acts that don't pan out. So, the record company and management loses big time. But then, then they, occasionally get a hit like this. And then, it sort of offsets, I guess. But to the
right, it's kind of like the movie business where they put a whole lot of money into these movies and a whole bunch of them shit the bed and they lose money on it. But then they have a few hits and they make a ton of cash on those.
Right. But then they sort of have to like cover their losses from prior. So like then the people involved in the one that did well don't see maybe as much benefit. Yeah. Okay.
They want to see the books. Yeah. Like, are you paying off your other debts with my money?
It is crazy to me that like new artists today still want to sign with like huge labels. I'm like, why, man? You have Spotify, YouTube, Apple, you could literally, to produce an album, you could literally go to Guitar Center, buy your own equipment. It's not really expensive. Produce an album, and just put it out there and market it yourself and make 100% of the profit. I just don't understand why. Like, I mean, and look at somebody like the guy Lil Nas X that had that little country rap song that just like was huge the past year or so.
Yeah.
He didn't even intend for that to be like some huge hit. He just made like a fun song and put it on TikTok, and it just blew up, and I'm like, man, I mean, you couldn't do that, 10, 20 years ago. You just couldn't. There were these gatekeepers. You were a handful of record companies and a handful of distributors, maybe only 3 of them that you had to go through, and you had to kind of pay the piper to get out there,
Yeah, let's talk about that real quick. Like the music industry, especially back when what songs were played on the radio was really influenced by the record companies giving money to these radio stations to play certain songs.
Yeah, the payola scandal, right? That was what they call that?
Yeah, so I mean, they pretty much decided, hey, we got this song, we think it's gonna be a hit. Here, you guys, play it all around the country, and then you're gonna get your money kickbacks and whatnots. So they basically decided, they're the hit makers, really, right? I mean, they decided who was going to be a star. But these days, yeah, you can do, like Ryan's saying, you can do it all yourself. You don't need those people anymore. Thanks to technology, the cost of producing an album is cheaper than ever. And yeah, I don't know how many people still listen to radio. It's probably still a pretty big number while people are still commuting and whatnot. But it's not like it used to be since you had, like you said, Spotify and other things like that.
Oh, yeah, no way.
Yeah, so can we talk a little bit? I want to shift this a bit and talk about how, as evil as the drug war is, that without it, we wouldn't have had this level of quality of music. You know what I mean? Right. Like it's the adversity and the challenges that they faced that inspired them to write what they did and do what they did.
Are you making a Bill Burr point right now?
I did watch Bill Burr last night, and it was really good. Oh, it's great. I mean, the Chappelle one's pretty good, especially in the current climate of how, you can't say anything. Like, I don't know how comedians do anything these days without getting shut down by the Twitterati. And so Chappelle's was a breath of fresh air, but it doesn't hold a candle to what he was doing 10, 15 years ago.
No. You can't even compare it.
Yeah, but the Bill Burr one, man, he's just full tilt. He's like, fuck it. It's pretty awesome.
I love Burr, so I'm going to check it out.
Yeah, it's great. But it's
but in the special, he makes the point, right? Daniel, go ahead and make it.
Oh, you have the floor, sir.
No. He was having an argument with his wife, and they were talking about the different races had invented, right? And then he's like, well, if you didn't have all that years of slavery and oppression, you wouldn't have had the amazing blues music and blah blah blah, right?
Right.
So you can't have it both ways. You can't have like incredible success, but then complain about your hard times. It's like when Eminem got rich, he couldn't rap about being broke anymore. So
right. And I've heard this argument also with like the early 90s and grunge, that there was the SNL crisis in the late 80s. And I guess there was a bit of a economic downturn related to that. And so music there was a revival in like visceral, impactful music for a while. And then it sort of went back into like pop land and got kind of crappy again. And it seems to go in these waves related to economic cycles in a way.
Oh, yeah.
It's like the good times breed weak men breed hard times make strong men make good times. That whole like vicious cycle.
Right. Like when you have the trust fund kids, they don't usually get a whole lot accomplished.
Right. Yeah.
That is interesting, though. I mean, it's something about, I guess, music and art in general. I guess humans, we kind of identify with that, with the struggle and people coming up through adversity. I mean, if you look at, hip hop, it came up in the late 70s and the 80s during, the stagflation of the 70s and the turmoil of the 80s and the war on drugs and the war on poverty. And it was just crazy. And then you look at jazz and the blues coming up during, post-Reconstruction and, the Great Depression and all that stuff. Something about the struggle just makes some great art. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And I don't know if like the SNL crisis and all that like impacted Los Angeles. I think there were other things impacting Los Angeles, like the crack epidemic and the police brutality, and they were responding to that kind of stuff. And and the drug war and all that.
Well,
that fucking tank.
Cube doesn't write "fuck the police" if he doesn't get harassed by the cops all the time.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they have that fucking tank. Like, where's the warrant for that thing?
No warrant.
Yeah, it's just like knock down the house.
You could like pull up videos of that shit on YouTube. Like, they didn't care, man. They were driving a tank through your house, and I mean, people forget. I mean, it was crazy in South Central LA. It was a war zone, So, and the police brought that same mentality as the Ninth Infantry or whatever. I mean, they came in as occupiers and they tore shit up, man. I mean, that was a crazy time. I'm glad I was a young kid during those days.
Yeah, and it's weird because like you look at those things and then you kind of peel back like, okay, why did that happen? Okay, and what led to that and what led to that? So you've got like the cops treating them like shit, treating the people that live there like shit, but the people who they're treating like shit are like doing, slinging drugs and whatever gang related activity because opportunity has been regulated away from them, right? Minimum wage laws, licensure, things that prevent them from doing something otherwise productive that is legal, and so you have all of these things that impact one another, and then the consequences are part of that onion that you peel back, right? And I have this question that why are so many Black people living in that particular area? Like, what led to that? Does anyone know?
In like Watts and Compton and that sort of thing?
Yeah, like in a concentrated way in that area. Was it like because like the 60s and 70s, the downtown cores were kind of run down, and so it was cheaper?
If you look, well, you had the they call it the Great Migration back in the early 20th century. You had a lot of Blacks from the South moving up north to Detroit, to New York, to Indiana, and it was moving to the West Coast too, because they were there weren't any Jim Crow laws out there. They were hiring Black people to work in factories during World War II. Blacks were going out there to work on aircrafts and stuff like that. So there were a lot of hiring opportunities. So you had kind of a Black middle class get built out there fairly quickly. All those little houses you see in South Central, it's ghetto now, but back in like the 50s, those were like nice Black middle class neighborhoods where people were doing great. And it just kind of devolved over time. Once you introduce the Great Society and
all the progressive policies.
Say what?
All those progressive policies.
Yeah, I mean, it just tore it down. I mean, it's kind of sad.
Yeah.
Well, and not to get too conspiratorial, but there's a lot of great evidence that the CIA was bringing in cocaine into this country in the 80s.
Yeah, at the very least, turning a blind eye. At the very least, saying, "Yeah, do what you got to do so we could get this money to fund the Contras, but we don't care where you put it."
Yeah, we covered that in American Made, right?
Yeah, we did American Made. That hints at a lot of stuff. It doesn't get into all of it, but yeah, I mean, whether they facilitated it or actively did it, they certainly could have easily prevented it and didn't. Like you said, turn a blind eye.
Now, so World War II seems to be sort of a driver for bringing a lot of people to certain areas to work in military industrial complex type shit. And then a generation later, you start seeing, I guess, the ghettoification of certain areas.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to my mom a while back, and she was saying when she was young in the 60s, so many people were moving to California. And she was like, wow. She was like, they would say, well, welfare checks are real good out there, like housing, and give you a big welfare check and this and that, so they created an incentive out, even back then, even though California back then wasn't like, super liberal, it was probably more liberal relative to everywhere else in the United States.
Oh,
so
okay.
You gotta have, those early progressive policies of, welfare and housing and all that stuff attracted a lot of, whatever you want to call them, parasites or whatever.
Yeah, and then they don't have to work for it. They don't have to provide value for it. So they're not.
If you're moving somewhere because I can get a bigger welfare check, not because a job where the people in the 40s, the 30s, 40s, and 50s were moving out there because of jobs. People in the 60s, 70s moving out there because, hey, I can get a big welfare check. Obviously, that's a different type of person you're pulling in,
Right. And then what are they going to do? Like, they're not doing a job, so they've got all this free time. Their basic needs are met, or to a degree. And I heard the Dem debates last night that Yang guy wants to give everyone money. It sounds like a terrible idea.
$1,000.
Yeah. So then you got the Watts riots, right? That's 68. And was that related to who died in 68? Bobby Kennedy.
No, that was
MLK?
Martin Luther King.
Okay, so both of them that year, right?
Yep.
And was the Watts riot related to that, or because there were also riots in Chicago, right, for the Democratic National Convention?
Yeah, there were riots everywhere, man. It was crazy. But I mean, nothing like the Watts riots. After King got killed, there was the Detroit riots, there were the Watts riots, there were Baltimore riots, New Orleans, everywhere.
Okay, all right. And then after the Rodney King one, like we were talking about earlier, that was what, 91?
92?
92?
Late 91 or early 92, something like that.
All right. And then we get the now is the moment to talk about the Korean shopkeepers.
Yeah.
Let's
the
get
rooftop
them in.
sniper guys.
Yeah, so Robert, lead us off, and then we'll go to Ryan, and then we're going to have to start winding this down pretty soon, but I want to get this topic in here.
Wow, we haven't even scratched the surface of all the things to talk about that I have in my notes, but okay.
Let's keep going. Just keep going, man.
Well, we'll just have a big old Kathleen Turner overdrive or something. We'll do all kinds of stuff. But anyway, I wanted to talk about the Korean snipers just a little bit. They're not snipers, but they're the shopkeepers that are going to defend their property with weapons. And I mean, they were what, the only ones that did it, as far as I understand, and their shops survived for the most part, as far as I understand it. There's briefly shown in the film, but I'm glad they put it in. I didn't even notice it in the film, honestly. I had to have Daniel and Ryan tell me it was in there. But I wanted to discuss it just because I loved it because, they weren't calling the cops. They're just like, no, get some guns, get on top of the roof. And we're going to,
be a deterrent.
We're going to be a deterrent. We don't necessarily have to shoot anybody, but we can, we can fire some warning shots or whatever. But we got to let people know that we're not going to fuck around and we're going to protect our shit. And they don't get any shit for it. And rightfully so. Although the left in this country sure seems to think that guns don't prevent crime. Guns are just evil and bad, and we need to take them all away. But, they ignore this instance of it.
Yeah, or the 3 million defensive uses of a handgun that the CDC estimates happens every year.
Yeah, or not, and then all the reduced crime that they benefit from their friends or their neighbors having a gun, or even potentially having a gun.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's the potential, the concealed carry is really the thing, because then a potential perpetrator doesn't know who's armed and who isn't.
Exactly. But in this case, they knew those Korean shop owners were armed, and they weren't going to go fuck with them because they have a chance of getting shot. But in the other, the open season areas, they got all messed up. Like in a gun-free zone. It's a lesson that some people still have to learn.
Yeah, now these riots, I mean, there were people legitimately pissed off, and rightfully so. But then there were other people, like this mob mentality kind of happens, right? Or this, what do they call that? When you remember seeing the concert where there's this guy dancing all by himself, and then one or two other people join him. And then there's this point where there's enough people doing it to where then just a flood of people do it. So it's like there's the early adopter who looks like a crazy weirdo, and then two or three people join him that like validates that this is a thing that can be done, and so it's not so weird anymore. And then like the 100th monkey does it, and then the whole crowd joins in and does it very rapidly, right? It's like
that
this
herd mentality.
Yeah, this tipping point thing. And so I wonder how much of that affects like in a riot, because there is looting, but I don't think that's why. That wasn't the reason, like there were people who took advantage of a situation because there were riots. You know what I mean? Like I view the looting as separate from the riot. Like the riot was because of legitimate anger of an injustice. And then the looting was, we're going to take advantage of this situation. And that's why the Korean shop owners were like, all right, well, we don't want to be taken advantage of in that way.
Well, can we talk about the outrageousness of the verdict? And this is a government deciding.
We've found we've done nothing wrong.
The government didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah. I mean,
it's like our violent enforcers we're following, like, as long as they follow their own horrific, immoral training, whatever their guidebook says they can and cannot do, or they're allowed to do, as long as they do that, then whatever they do is fine. And the court always finds them innocent. Even if they just pull out a gun and murder somebody, just shoot them in the face. Like, well, I felt threatened for my life. But we had this one on video. And the thing that people, like apologists, use to defend the cops in that situation, I remember back in the day, my dad said this. And he was like, well, he's still moving and they're telling him not to move. And it's like, he's like trying to cover himself and he's like writhing around in agony as they're beating him repeatedly. It's like,
Yeah, he's
Man,
no threat to anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is one of those situations where you almost wonder if they intentionally did that to spark something off, because if you were rational, you would say, okay, they got us on this one. There's video. It's blatant. We better nail these guys. And all the ones we don't have video on, and there's like shaky evidence, or it's not like in the media eye, people aren't like outraged by it.
Right. Have some fall guys.
Yeah, let those guys go. Or whatever, like we'll do the status quo of the thin blue line, or the whatever the fuck we call it, the bros before hoes thing.
Yeah, it's like it's like the gang mentality where they like circle the wagons and like protect all the blue people.
Right. But the ones that, it's just blatant. All right, sorry, you got caught. We got to come down on you. And then the riot doesn't happen, right?
Right. It makes sense to me. I've never heard of a conspiratorial take on the Rodney King beating. No. Is there some conspiracy about like who was taking the video of it? I don't remember any of this.
I don't know who did take the video. I have no idea.
Yeah, it's I'm fuzzy on all of this stuff. I mean, it's a long time ago. I'm just saying, like, if you have a system in place that is going to check itself, then when it's caught blatantly red-handed with eyeballs on it, notoriety, like it's an outrage. People like the population knows about it. They see it. They watch it. Those are the times you actually have to pretend that it's not justice only for the plebs.
Man, the police, they don't even want to set that precedent. They have to create that view that they are always in the right, and it's so frustrating, but it makes so much sense. And I remember someone, I think it was a teacher, maybe a coach back during that time, saying something like, how do you expect them to investigate themselves? I remember saying that. Even back then, I was just a little kid, and I was like, that makes sense. Like, why would they find themselves guilty? It's just, they're all the government, the court, the police, everybody. It's all the same team.
Yeah, it's like playing basketball, and it's like call your own fouls. We're like, I got fouled.
So I mean, why would they? They don't have to. Those guys are free. We could say, hey, why didn't they? Could have done this. They could have avoided a riot and stuff like that. But those guys are free. They're not in jail. And, there were some changes. If you look up Daryl Gates, he was the police commissioner in LA that whole era. He was a super ruthless, crooked, corrupt guy. And I think he got, booted out after that. But there weren't any changes, like real structural changes.
Yeah.
Were they? And it makes you, my thing I always wondered, like, since they caught that on camera, what happened before cameras existed? Like, imagine what was being done before people had cameras to catch stuff like that,
Yeah.
Right.
Because before that, it was literally their word against yours. So it was the police saying, if those cameras weren't there, the police would have said, Rodney King charged us with a weapon or something, and we had to take, action to protect ourselves. And everyone would have believed him. Everyone. Because Rodney King, he wasn't like an angel. He was, he was a criminal. He had like a record, and I think he was a drug addict or something like that. So nobody would have assumed different, but the camera made people say like, oh, okay, this is a little different. So it just gave a kind of a glimpse into what a lot of people were dealing with at that time without the cameras being viewed,
Yeah. And that just reminded me, I think I heard somebody long ago say, oh yeah, he was high on PCP, and it's, it makes you feel like extra strong or whatever. And so he was not as affected by them subduing him or whatever, but it's just blatant in the video. I mean, it sounds like just an excuse to me.
Yeah. And what I always want to know is what was he doing in the first place? Like why were they even there talking to him? I mean, was he actually hurting somebody? Was he attacking somebody? Was he being incredibly, reckless or something like that? Like how many times?
Was it just a traffic stop, right?
Well, how many times do you see, the only charge being, resisting arrest?
Yeah.
The only charge, like no other reason. Like when Dre gets arrested, he's just standing there and he's just not obeying the cops' bullshit authority to leave. And he's just like, what? And so then he just gets arrested for nothing.
Oh man, and this is what kills me about like black leftists that tote the whole gun, anti-gun line. I'm like, what do you think if gun confiscation really goes down? How do you think that would look? What do you think that would look like? I mean, do you think they're going to roll into Wyoming and start taking people's guns first? No, they're going to go to Baltimore. They're going to go to New Orleans, Chicago. Those are going to be the first people that get the effects of that police interaction, stop and frisk or, no knock raids and stuff like that, because those are the highest crime areas. Those are where people are actually dying. So if you're a black leftist, promoting this anti-gun, gun confiscation policy, you're basically saying we want more interaction between blacks and police.
Right.
Violent interaction with the possibility of one being armed. How do you think that's going to play out?
Yeah, and those are the areas that are already like being affected by increased, police interactions anyway. And,
exactly.
And I would also say that those are the areas that have gun control or very strict gun laws in place, and the majority of the guns that are used in any criminal activity are technically illegal guns as is.
Yeah, yeah. And I brought that question up to some black, liberal friends I know, and they have no answer. They're like, yeah, that's true. They really have no answer to that because that's not going to end well for you. It's not going to end well.
Guns bad. Beep boop.
It's unbelievable. I'm a type of person that always try to look at things through someone else's eyes, or, guess it's empathetic or whatever. And I try to look through their eyes and say, how can I? And I just don't see it. Just from a logical angle, I just don't see it. Like, why would you want the government to take away that right? I mean, I don't know. I think there was Michael Malice that retweeted it. It was like, I don't know who said it, but it was like, America makes up like only 5% of the Earth's population, but we have like almost 50% of the guns. And Michael Malice was like, that's a pretty good promotion for, gun rights or whatever. I was like, that's true. I'm like, that's pretty awesome. Like, that made me feel a little better that this country is that well armed. I mean, if you're I'm not that I'd sit around fearing some invasion from another country, but if you did fear that, being a well-armed populace is a pretty good thing,
Yeah, it's kind of the history of the country. If you're you want to get nationalistic about it, that's the whole point. So what else we got? We got very little time. Any big pressing stuff we want to get to? Because I've got a few things, but I don't know where you want to do with this.
Oh, man. So I just want to throw one thing out there, and it's going to sound like I'm a cop apologist, which is insane for me. But like I was talking about, the peeling the onion back, you see the consequences and downstream effects of the policies in place and certain things that happen. I can see why the police were treating them this way because of how they presented themselves. And it's you guys are familiar with Walter Williams. He has a brief YouTube video from a talk where he's talking about, all right, you see a tiger walking down the street. Are you going to approach that tiger and say, hey, are you a nice tiger or a bad tiger? Or are you going to say, hey, that's a fucking tiger. I'm not going to get any closer to that. Right.
So you're kind of giving them a pass for when they assault NWA outside the record studio or the recording studio where.
No, I'm just saying I understand why they would think that they're criminals or up to no good and treat them in the way that they did.
But they essentially had like a stop and frisk policy, right? They see some guys that look like hoods and they're going to pull over and they're going to shake them up and see what drugs or guns fall out of them.
Or plant them on them.
They're the LAPD. What are they going to do?
Right. And I'm not trying to excuse them at all. I'm just saying that in the position they're in, it makes sense. But everything they do is, as Robert Hicks says,
sense.
they're enforcing immoral laws. They sign up for this job and agree to apply all of the laws, even the immoral ones. Therefore, there are no good cops, right? So I'm just trying to make the point that stereotyping and is a useful shortcut mechanism to understanding unfamiliar situations.
Well, sure.
Before you know any better.
It's a time-saving device, and it's an energy-saving device. I would agree with you that if you were on the side of the cops and you say, well, that was the one time it didn't work out when they actually were harassing these musicians, but the other 99 times they're actually just going to be harassing drug dealers and whatever. So yeah, from a numbers point of view, it makes sense from the cops. But what they're doing is horrifically immoral.
Absolutely.
They're profiling, and not to say that profiling is necessarily wrong if you're not aggressing against anybody, but in the way they were doing it, like, I'm going to see somebody that looks a certain way and I'm going to go and attack that person. You're the aggressor.
Right. And someone needs to understand like our whole philosophy to kind of get the nuance of what I'm trying to say, I guess. Because from what I've said, it sounds awful. But if you go back and listen to some of our previous shows, I think you'll get the gist that we don't believe in any intervening with peaceful people.
Right. I mean, you're kind of making it sound like they're asking for it. Like, what was she wearing?
Right. The victim blaming thing. No, I'm just saying I can understand. Like, if I were a cop and I was in that position, I could see why I would feel that way. You know.
Yeah. I mean, well, let's just okay. Ancapistan exists. Say we have Ancapistan, and you're assigned to keep Ancapistan. This little neighborhood, this covenant community, or whatever you think it is. You're tasked to keep it safe. So obviously, as a security professional, you're going to profile. You will profile. You're going to, you're going to make a decision on, an analysis on what has been a danger to that neighborhood in the past, and then you're going to say, okay, I'm going to have to keep an eye out for that. That's just natural. It's natural for humans.
Yeah. But you're basically just describing what happened with George Zimmerman.
Yeah, literally with George Zimmerman. Even though I took a different take than most libertarians. I mean, most libertarians that I knew were like, well, it made sense. But I was a little different on the whole Trayvon Martin thing. But yeah, it's that you will have to profile at some point. And okay, if most of the people that are doing the drug dealing, or if we're in Ancapistan, let's just say, just doing stealing and murdering, and they dress a certain way and they look a certain way, you're kind of going to keep an eye out for that, But there's keeping an eye out, and then there's just literally harassing and and aggressing, literally aggressing towards someone without collecting the facts.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what you had with with the LAPD and a lot of police.
Yeah, and certainly how presented in the film. I mean, they are initiating the aggression. I think beyond what I'm trying to say, like they might be suspicious. That's what I'm saying, but they certainly go over the line in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's down to the fact that they're the violent thugs that always have to be in control of the situation. They always have to be in charge. They have to keep this veneer of this authority. And yeah, I would have no problem with them if they were to profile and then drive up and just start talking to them, have a conversation. But they go up and actually physically assault them. And they're insulting them the whole time and calling them boy and, just being complete assholes.
Right. With impunity because they can get away with it.
Right.
That's because it's a monopoly.
A
monopoly service provider. Yep. You got to pay for it whether you like it or not.
Yeah. What do they care? It's not like they have to compete against any other service.
Exactly.
All right. Well, hey, I hate to cut this short. I know we have like plenty more to talk about, but it's time for that final summary and review. Robert, if you would like to lead us off.
Sure. So I really enjoyed this movie, but I'm a kind of a homer for this movie. Like I said, I'm a fan of the music. I'm a fan of these artists. I'm a fan of the the spirit of these guys, especially with Fuck the Police. I mean, how can you not love these guys? They got the balls to write that song and sing it in Detroit when the cops were staring right in their face saying they're not allowed to sing it. It was great. I thought that the actors were excellent. The guy that played Eazy-E and Ice Cube were fantastic. I mean, they're all solid, but those are the two like main ones that stood out to me. The guy that played Dre was pretty good, but I thought that the guy that played Eazy-E was just really impressive. Like Daniel was saying, it's a biopic. It's it compresses a lot into a little bit of space, even though it's about a 3-hour movie. And maybe it would benefit from a little bit more singular, cohesive storyline. But man, I was just in such enjoyment mode, learning all about these artists the whole time in their life and why things happened the way they did and why the music came out and why they were beefing with each other. And, that was just all really interesting to me. So it's hard for me to give, a really number that, it's like, I'm such a fan. So I have to give this like a high, like 8.5. I know our friend, The Negotiator, this is his favorite movie of all time. I wonder what he would give it. This isn't my favorite movie of all time, but it's really good. And I would highly recommend it. If you're a fan of the music, I'm sure you've already seen it. But if you haven't, and you're a fan of just like really talented rappers, like I think Snoop Dogg is one of the greatest rappers of all time. I love the way he sounds. And I think Dre's one of the greatest producers of all time. So for me, as a music geek, not that I'm the biggest music geek, but from this period in time, this is when I was the geekiest about music. This was great for me. So, Daniel.
All right, very good. Well, I'm going to echo a lot of your sentiments. I was a fan of their music, but I hadn't seen this movie until this week. And like I said in the open, I for some reason thought this was more recent than 4 years ago. So that just shows how time flies when you have kids, and all of a sudden it's like 5 years later or whatever. But I found that this was a movie that was built for fans. Like, you sort of had to have a little bit of foreknowledge of what was going on, like who these guys were, and it filled in a lot of that, and that makes it interesting and fun to watch. The biographical aspect of it, and seeing some of the reasons why they did certain things or wrote certain songs or why the beef got started. That was really interesting to see. And I had no idea that Cube didn't really diss them until they dissed him, and then No Vaseline was like the fucking atomic payback to them. And we didn't even talk about that interview where they talk about Jerry Heller and Cube being potentially anti-Semitic when he was talking about an individual person who was screwing him and not a whole class of people or group of people. So it's just bizarre. But at the end of the day, I felt like it did need some more of a focal point. Like, there was a lot of events that happened. They could have found 1 or 2 or 3 big things to make kind of like the focal point of the movie that would have satisfied this critic a little bit more. And then there was a little bit of sloppy editing, I think, like the getting out of Dre's contract. Like, there was the beating with Suge Knight, and then there was the Interscope guy coming in, and it was a little bit messy trying to understand that. And then when Easy goes and talks to Jerry, they actually repeat a line of text verbatim in that scene. Like, it's like you're doing a little deja vu take, and something like that in a movie just seems so weird to me that they would leave that in, especially once they know about it. And it's like in a digital format, wouldn't they just be like, oh yeah, let's take out that extra exact repeat of what he just said again. But anyway, it's still fun. And I can't imagine how The Negotiator would consider this his favorite movie of all time. Well, I'll have to ask him, like, why. I mean, it's not a terrible movie. It's a good movie, and it's a movie for fans, and I enjoyed myself watching it. But I'm going to go with a 7.5. So it's not like, amazing, but, pretty good. And that's my opinion on it. So, Ryan, let's get your final summary and review rating out of 10. You can go decimal point deep or do what you like.
Yeah, I thought the movie was terrific. I mean, it was a kind of a love letter to fans of music of the 90s, late 80s, 90s, people that grew up just, it was such, I guess every era says, every person says, hey, my era, when they were coming up as youngsters, they say their era was the greatest. But I really think, like, those 90s, man, it was just so diverse. Even hip hop as a genre was so diverse. You had, New York hip hop, you had West Coast, you had down south, you had Midwest, you had Bone Thugs, Snoop Dogg, Tupac, NWA, Wu-Tang, Nas, Jay-Z, Biggie, Tribe Called Quest. Just such a different, Outkast, just completely different talents and languages. And it was, music sounds. It was just so different. Like, if you listen to hip hop today, it's terrible. I can't even listen to it. It's all the same. It all sounds the same. It's all the same producers. It's really crap. So, I mean, it's nice that we're getting to the point where we're seeing biopics of that time we came up in, in the late 80s, early 90s, which was really crucial. I mean, hip hop is as far as like a genre, it's pretty young. It started in the 70s, grew into the 80s, and then it kind of turned into something else. It started out as kind of a dance party music, and it moved more into they call it the CNN of the ghetto. It was just, stories about what was going on in, really downtrodden neighborhoods in America, and then that kind of commercialized. And so it's kind of nice to just see, that starting point. I think a lot of youngsters today that saw the movie, I guess I just got a lot of enjoyment out of them seeing where a lot of this stuff comes from, because you got to remember, I mean, even early hip hop, there was no cursing in rap. I remember when I was like, 8 or 9 years old, and my cousin coming to the house with the NWA tape, and he's like, man, they have a song called, and he whispered it to me. We're like in the middle of the street, and he whispers to me, fuck the police. And I'm like, what? There's a song that says that? And he was like, yeah, we'd go listen to it. And it was just like our own little secret. You know, it was just so amazing just to hear that kind of stuff. And it's so funny when you look at today versus back then, because back then, you know, the people that hated that stuff were kind of the right wing, you know, real conservative religious types, you know, that would kind of shut down speech and trying to put, you know, parental advisory stickers on albums and trying to shut down NWA. But now, you know, in 2019, that attitude comes from more from the left, you know, so it's kind of funny how, you know, you juxtapose that to today. You know, but overall, the movie, I just enjoyed it. I enjoyed the music. I love the live performances, especially Ice Cube. That was Ice Cube's son, who obviously, you know, who played Ice Cube, and I thought he just embodied his dad. I forgot that was someone else. I started thinking that was Ice Cube as I watched it. You know, and I loved Eazy-E. I actually know that guy, the guy that played Eazy-E. He's from New Orleans, and I mean, I don't know him like personally, hang out, but we kind of ran around the same neighborhood or whatever. And I saw him from time to time. And that was his first like big movie role. I thought he just did excellent. And, you know, the daddy that played Dr. Dre, I just love that they just brought out that whole era and showed how, you know, there was no set in stone template on how to do the art they were trying to create. They were literally creating as they went along and brought along their experiences, what they knew, and they put that on record. They had no idea if it'll be good or if people would like it or not. They just put it out there and, you know, it became like a huge phenomenon. So I like that. I give the movie like an 8. It's not a 10 because I think the latter third of the movie kind of gets convoluted, kind of rushed and jam-packed. So I can't give it a 10, but I think like, especially like the first half of them coming together and the initial performances and all that stuff, I thought that was just, that was the best part of the movie. So I'll give it a good solid 8.
All right. Well, that is 8 is great. So thank you for that, Ryan. And thank you for joining us for this episode. It's always a pleasure to have you on, and we'd love to have you back on again in the future. And speaking of the future, we just did Back to the Future last week, and we talked a little bit about the drug war. We talked a little bit about the drug war this week, and we're going to talk about it a little bit next week. We do the most recent and potentially last Clint Eastwood film called The Mule. And we're going to have a guest, Rocky Ferrenburg, who had joined us back last Christmas time, I think, for Smallfoot. So that will be the episode next week. Clint Eastwood's The Mule, which is available on HBO right now. So if any of you guys have HBO or streaming, you'll be able to watch it before we record that one next week. So any final words from you, Robert, and then to Ryan, and then we'll say good night from last night on the Last Nighters here, episode 89 of the show.
I mean, we're doing a lot of like nostalgia lately. It's been a lot of fun for me. I mean, as a old man now, it is fun to go back and look at your formative years. And it's weird looking at it like, like movies are being made about it. Like look at these great guys doing this great stuff back then. And I thought it was great at the time, but I didn't, and it was a big phenomenon. But I guess it just didn't dawn on me that these guys are being held in the same kind of pantheon as like all other music greats, which I think they should be, but it's nice to see because it's certainly at the time, a lot like in the movie shows, a lot of the prevailing opinion was, this is just crap. This is just ghetto trash music. These guys are just violent thugs that are, talking over a beat. This is not good stuff. But certainly I think time is told and these guys are recognized as the artists that they were. And it's been fun talking about it. It's been fun talking to you, Ryan. Thank you again for coming on. And hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for tonight. So we'll say goodnight from last night and join us next week for The Mule.
In the early days of the internet, radical libertarians were scattered, lonely, and faceless. Without direction, they resigned to scour the web, sifting through content providers in a wasteland plagued by YouTube demonetization, Facebook jail, and covert internet censorship. But then, in 2017, the Libertarian Union was formed. Finally, the average Joe libertarian could find a thriving community of independent podcasters and content providers, all in one convenient location. At Libertarian Union, we'll always have the latest news, interviews, discussions, and even movie reviews. With hundreds of episodes and more added all the time, you'll always find something fresh at libertarianunion.com.